watches all the new millionaires. Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody, let's lose control. Brad and John never wants to follow. Get ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
It is the BJ Show. I am Brad. He is John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. You need the spelling because you need to type that into your phone, your desktop, whatever. JohnCombest.com. That is his web address. And for 22 years, right, John? 22 plus years. Coming up on 23 soon. What is it, in October?
Yeah, it'll be 23 in October, yeah.
23 years, every single day. Never missed a day. You've never had a day when you just go, I don't want to do that. You've done it every single day?
Yeah, just, you put your head down, you do the work, you don't brag about it, you just deliver for the people, Brad.
He delivers this great website, nothing fancy. John will not be insulted if you say, well, there's no graphics and there's no pictures and there's no video, because that's how he intends it. It's just a aggregation of all the stuff going on in the state of Missouri. Sometimes as many, 30, 40? You have a record how many things you've had on there? Do you know how many?
Yeah, I have no idea. And, we focus generally, Brad, on quality and not quantity.
But it's typically more than 20, correct?
Yeah, it's usually a couple dozen.
Yeah.
A couple dozen, Brad.
And what we do is we start the show off every morning, and we give the top 3. And we'll move right into that. By the way, before, I said we'll move right into that. I said, by the way.
We'll move right into that. And before we get to it.
Right. That made a hell of a lot of sense, didn't it? Can we make a pledge today? Can you and I make a pledge today?
Yes.
Can we pledge?
Now, you mean a pledge of donation to St. Louis Public Radio, right? Where the news is where we say it is. Bum, 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 bum. Yeah.
No.
What's our pledge, Brad?
The pledge is we're not going to talk about the debates. Okay? You want to do that?
Yeah. I had no plan to talk about the debates.
Because every stinking thing on the internet this morning is debate. So we won't talk about it. Maybe we'll talk about it tomorrow. And we'll talk about it tomorrow. But anyway, we start the show off. We bring this guy in, and he's really good at doing things like,
we're on our way to the number one.
And saying things like,
and here they are.
And saying things like,
now on with the countdown.
And he starts off with,
in third place.
We're not going to talk about it, Brad, but I know where you're going tonight, and I know where all of St. Louis is going to be tonight, Brad. You know where that is?
Dave & Buster's?
Absolutely not. You're going to be at the Missouri History Museum.
Oh.
Because according to St. Louis Public Radio and St. Louis on the Air, we need to go to queer rights, Brad. It centers on writing and storytelling for the queer experience in St. Louis. Brad, it is tonight. And there's that D word. Well, a lot of queers love the D word. But there's that D word going on tonight, Brad. You don't want to be a part of that D word. You want to go down to the Missouri History Museum, and you want to hear I said black. Boy, that's a Freudian slit. You want to hear a group of self-identified queer comedians, singer-songwriters, poets, and playwrights do what they do best. Well, probably do what they do second best. It doesn't involve a D. And they're performing tonight at the Missouri History Museum, Brad. So I can't make it because I got that other thing at that other place. But hopefully tomorrow, Brad, as you alluded to earlier, you can talk about what you saw down at Queer Rights today. And again, the story is brought to us by St. Louis Public Radio because we know, Lord knows, there's nothing more important going on in the St. Louis region.
You know what? I'm just going to hit a button here.
Up a notch to number 2.
Speaking of public radio, Brad, NPR is very happy, particularly Nina Totenberg at NPR. And it is indeed the top link on my website today. You can find NPR's Nina Totenberg piece via St. Louis Public Radio again. And NPR is celebrating the fact that the Missouri Supreme Court ruled against Missouri and Louisiana in the case about social media. Now, Brad, you and I have discussed this a couple times before, or maybe a few times before. The idea that the government under the Biden administration was at best collaborating with and at worst conspiring with social media platforms to stop the spread of information that was critical of the government policies on COVID-19 vaccines, disease origin, things like that. And the Supreme Court indeed ruled against Missouri, and Louisiana reversed the lower court ruling. And I'm no lawyer, Brad, but according to the ruling, Amy Coney Barrett said that the plaintiffs had failed to make the case that the company's actions could be traced to pressure from the Biden administration. Now, I would suggest anyone interested in this, which is approximately 5% of people listening to this, should read Nina Totenberg's piece, because she gives a very good progressive view of why the government should be out here, Brad, particularly in an election year, combating disinformation, voting misinformation. It undermines the ability of citizens to make informed decisions, Brad. So it's a good thing, I think, that the Biden administration can collaborate with social media companies and stop the spread of conservative information, Brad.
Well,
and libertarian information.
The
Brad.
sad thing about this, John, and once again, this brings into my useless bachelor's degree of journalism and my favorite professor at the time we all hated, Dr. Camille Winter. And the perfect example of this is the Hunter Biden laptop, which was once upon a time, deemed to be Russian disinformation and signed by 51 different people with the famous
yes.
letter, which now has been corroborated by the federal government that it really was Hunter's laptop and it really was crazy stuff on there that he wrote, and it wasn't had anything to do with Russian. So I guess, isn't there, there's this crazy saying that one man's feast is another man's famine or something like that. Isn't one man's disinformation another man's information? I mean,
I think so. When it comes to NPR, it's like the Nelson Mandela quote, where you stand depends on where you sit. So if you're quite progressive, like say a Nina Totenberg, you want misinformation or you want to battle election misinformation. But as it relates to Hunter and the laptop, that's a little different story, because Nina and those folks were just working on the best information they had, Brad.
But here's the irony to me. Let's say Nina Totenberg found out some juicy inside gossip about President Biden, and somebody from the Biden administration called up Nina Totenberg and said, Nina, don't do that story. Kill it. Mm-hmm. Don't do that story. She would probably say, well, I'm not going to do that because I'm a journalist. Get what I'm saying? I mean, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. And I will not be bullied.
Right.
I've been a boss girl for too long. I am a pioneer. I should have been retired 12 years ago. But my ego's so big that I got to stay on air.
And if you don't know it, I work for NPR. And we have nothing to do with the government other than you funding us, right?
Where the news is what we say it is.
Here, should I play here?
So that's number 2, Brad.
Should I hold it? Here we go.
We are National Public Radio, NPR, where the news is what we say is the news.
Yes. The news is what we say is the news.
The official theme song, Brad. I gotta admit that I heard that song before we went on the air, and it's been inspiring me the whole last 8 minutes, Brad.
There's something else I need to talk about with that. And by the way, I'm just moving on. I get sidetracked. John, you do that to me.
Yeah,
Okay.
See, we're gonna also we're not gonna say the D word, and right. We're also not going to get off track today, right, Brad?
That's right.
We're talking about pie in the sky hopes for today's
We're going
show.
to do our damnedest to stay right on track. And finally,
the number one.
Pull the fire alarm, Brad. Jamal Bowman lost up in New York, despite the best efforts of heroes like AOC and others, which brings attention to St. Louis, Missouri, and Cori Bush's primary election, August 6th. She's facing Wesley Bell and a woman named Maria Chappelle-Nadal in the Democratic primary. Brad, new polling came out just yesterday. According to a group called the Melman Group, which I do not believe is affiliated with Larry Bud Melman of David Letterman fame, but they were hired by the Democratic Majority for Israel PAC. And their poll puts Wesley Bell 1 point. That's right, 1 point over incumbent Cori Bush. Now, I went to the Melman Group's website, Brad, and I pulled their press release on this. And they surveyed 400 voters in the 1st Congressional District, which, frankly, I don't think is very many. I think that in most things like a congressional district, I think you would want at least 1,000. But hey, there's folks that are have more expert knowledge in polls than I do. And yeah, it shows that Wesley Bell, the headline is Wesley Bell has overcome a double-digit deficit in January to to pull ahead of Cori Bush by a single point. Brad, I think to cut to the chase here, I think this just means we're going to see obviously we're going to see a ton of money here. But one of the things I don't know, and one of the things you and I should talk about, is whether or not we will see national figures, like squad figures, make public appearances here. I imagine we'll have members of the squad come in and do some fundraisers to get some progressive money. But I wonder if we would see something like an AOC. You know how she did her hype girl performance with the potty mouth and all that stuff up in New York. I wonder if we would see that here in St. Louis.
Yeah, that didn't work too well for Jamal Bowman, did it?
It did. Now, I don't know if it necessarily hurt him. To be honest, it might have just been a non-factor. I think probably my guess is if you were kind of on the fence on that election, having AOC do bopping around the stage and doing a little overperformance there probably didn't move you one way or another, but I could be wrong.
Well, the interesting thing about that was this is stuff that I still have some things I get from journalistic organizations and things like that. And one of the stories that I read yesterday was sort of interesting, that the New York Times changed the headline on the Jamal Bowman story. You know what I'm talking about with this?
No, I don't know. What was that? What did they change it from and to?
The original headline, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it said something to the effect that Jewish organizations, killed Jamal Bowman's chance for, re-election, because if you know the whole story, that he's been very pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas, and I think a couple times outwardly anti-Jewish, and yet he represents part of Westchester County, I believe, which I think has a relatively high Jewish population of Westchester County, New York, and
that's what they're known for.
Right,
Westchester County is known for the Jewish population.
Right. So then what happened was apparently some people complained, so they changed the title or the headline on the New York Times article and took out the Jewish reference to it. But the whole thing is, the guy pulls the fire alarm. See, this is what I find fascinating about our law system. Okay, there's no doubt of the fact that he did that on purpose. And I think didn't he finally admit it, and didn't he finally plead guilty to a misdemeanor?
Yeah, I think so.
Or something like that.
I think he dropped whatever pretense he had of it not being intentional.
If you know the whole story, there was a big debate going on in the House, and he supposedly says, I was trying to get out to get some fresh air. So he thought that the lever he pulled was for the automatic door, which, was clearly marked fire alarm. Now, keep in mind, wasn't he a high school teacher? Wasn't that his background, that he was a high school teacher or a high school principal or something like that?
I don't know what his background was. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, don't you think someone who, advances to the point of they're a U.S. congressperson, they would know the difference between, a button you push to open up an electronic door or the fire alarm, where normally you have to pull something down, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think if you were at a school that had 4-day school weeks, you probably missed that training. Because you were only there for 4 days. I think that's usually taught on Fridays, Brad. So, I don't think we can hold teachers accountable for that.
John, you know what's interesting about you?
What's that?
At times, you sit there very nonchalantly and, very cool and collected, and you grab that hand grenade with your left hand, and you take your right hand, you put your finger into the pin with your right hand, you pull the pin, and you slowly roll it at me, and then...
and you know what, Brad? To quote a great iconic commercial from the 1980s, I learned it by watching you. John, where'd you learn to do that? Brad, I learned it by watching you.
What commercial is that? Doesn't ring a bell.
That was a drug-free. That was a partnership for a drug-free America.
Yeah,
it was a kid is playing banging drumsticks in his bed, and the dad comes in with a cigar box full of drugs and says, "Where'd you learn how to do this? Who taught you how to do this?" And the kid snaps and goes, "From you. I learned it by watching you." Parents, and then the tagline is, "Parents who do drugs have children who use drugs." Brad, co-hosts who throw grenades learn from older, more veteran co-hosts who throw grenades.
Do you know what they should do? In the Francis House School District, they should revive that commercial, and they should remember we used to have back in school, you had the AV carts. Remember the AV carts?
Oh, yeah, they can roll in a cart, Brad.
Right. No, they not roll in a cart. They should roll out a cart outside to the parents who are in line to pick up their kids and play that commercial as they're smoking their marijuana.
As they're token up in the line, Brad.
John,
I mean, how else are you going to deal with after school sports if you can't toke up?
John once again found the email that went out to Francis Howell's parents, which I still think is funnier than I'll get out. The email went out to Francis Howell parents that essentially said, when you're in the line to pick up your kids after school, refrain from smoking marijuana. Wasn't that what it essentially said in so many words?
Unbelievable. Which, by the way, I think that's an outrage because, you know, I need it for my glaucoma, Brad. Oh, wait, we don't need a medical excuse anymore? Okay. Never mind. I just like avoiding my problems, and I hate dealing with everything, so I toke up. That's why.
Man, I the interesting thing about that is, see, this is what I find fascinating about the whole thing. And once again, I will tell you up front, I'm not a marijuana guy. I'm not a drug guy. I'm not an alcoholic or alcohol kind of guy. Matter of fact, I get asked all the time. And matter of fact, there's a weird story that happened to me just yesterday where people ask me if I am an alcoholic because when I'm out,
because you're stumbling around and you sound drunk. Is that why?
Right. That's part of it.
That's why.
No, because
they hear some of your opinions and they're like, "Oh, don't worry. He just polished off a Mad Dog 40/40. He'll take a nap and he'll be fine."
I do my best. Foster Brooks. Remember who he was?
No, I don't remember him.
Don't you remember who Foster Brooks is?
No, repeat it a third time and maybe I'll remember, Brad.
Foster Brooks. There's the third time. Foster Brooks was this comedian who was very popular back in, I guess, the 70s, maybe early 80s. And his whole shtick was that he did comedy like he was drunk.
It sounds like a riot.
His whole... Hold on a minute.
It sounds like the type of humor I would love. Seriously.
Oh, hold on a minute. Let me see if I can find a clean cut of Foster Brooks. I think once you hear the guy, I think you might recognize his voice. But that was and matter of fact, what was interesting was, do you ever go back and watch these? They don't see it anymore. Although they had one recently where they had the one with Tom Brady, but they used to be on the networks all the time on CBS and NBC. They had the celebrity roast where they would roast.
Yeah, I remember those.
They would roast Dean Martin and stuff like that. Okay, Foster Brooks was one of the regulars on the roasts, and I think what happened was the reason he became out of favor was the whole mad thing, the mothers against drunk drivers, because that he was essentially, people were going, oh, it's so funny,
because they were criticizing him for glamorizing what was a serious
right,
problem,
the fact that he was
what a bunch of killjoys. Everybody loves laughing at a drunk.
Okay. Okay, hold on a minute. Okay, here. Let me see if I can just play this real quick. I'll just play this one clip because
it's a commercial.
About 3.5 years ago. Thank you, Doc.
Johnny Carson Show.
I think it was 3.5 years ago this gentleman made his first appearance on the show. It was one of our trips out to California before we moved here permanently. And at that time, he was the executive treasurer of the Burbank City Council. And he came to give us some greetings from Burbank. And we asked him on the first day of 1975 if he would come back again. He is now the executive secretary, or the executive treasurer. What did I say first?
I lost you.
Well,
he's been promoted.
He's been promoted.
Yes.
It's
a high position.
Yes, it is. Would you welcome Mr. Philip Brooks?
And this is a joke.
I beg your pardon, I haven't gotten to my blue mark yet.
Okay, well, it's going to run a commercial.
Why did no one tell Missouri drivers about this new rule?
But that's his shtick. His shtick,
Is it named Phil Brooks, you said?
Well, no, there was a joke. There was a joke because they were the lead up to it, that's a bad clip. I see if I can maybe find a better clip tomorrow. But that was a bad clip because they were playing a joke on the fact, if you remember, this is like ancient history for a lot of people. The Tonight Show originally started in New York City, and then they would do from time to time, they'd do a week in California. And then finally, Johnny Carson just got sick and tired of New York, like a lot of people do, and they moved the entire show out to California. So I think this was that the show, this was a 1975 show. So the joke was that they brought out Foster Brooks. In the lead-up, he talked about that, and they said he was like some guy from the Burbank city. Because, see, that was the other joke, that Johnny Carson used to make fun of Burbank all the time because the NBC studios are in Burbank, California. And Burbank, California is not the most prestigious place in the Los Angeles area. Matter of fact, it has sort of a dubious reputation. Even back then, it had somewhat of a dubious reputation. It wasn't like Beverly Hills or Brentwood or those kind of places. And that was the joke. They brought out Foster Brooks, and they pretended he was like a city council person from Burbank, and he did the whole thing. And his whole thing, he slurs his way through his routine and stuff like that. So that's the Foster Brooks reference. Aren't you glad you have old guys like me in the show to keep you up to date on what's going on with stuff like that?
I am. As a young egg, I was 2 years away from being fertilized back in 1975, but I appreciate the history lesson.
I don't know if I like that visual or not. Okay. We have to... John, you crack me up sometimes.
I mean, I hadn't descended. My mom hadn't ended the follicular stage. My dad's swimmers hadn't started going nuts. What can you do?
Thanks, John. I think we get it. Okay, we need to
I didn't even know HTML back then, Brad. Come on.
I don't think anybody knew HTML back then.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?